In this movie, we look at the last property of our box model, which is our margin. Now, our margins are the properties on the outside of our border that provide a buffer zone between that object and other objects. Now, just like our padding, we can control each side of our object. We can set our margin top, margin right, margin bottom, and margin left. Or we can end up writing in shorthand. So just like with our padding, we have the same options that will follow essentially the same rules. First we have margin value, and that's going to set the value the same all the way around. And then we have margin with two values, which will set the value for our margin to the top and bottom, and then the right and left with the second value. We also have a shorthand using three values, which will allow us to set the margin for the top with the first value, right and left with the second value, and then bottom with the third value. And then lastly, we have our four value shorthand, which will set the values for the top, right, bottom, and left. Now, we can also set up values that are negative or that use the keyword of auto. What the negative margins will allow us to do is to assist positioning elements on the screen so that they are exactly where we want them. And we can also use that auto value to have the browser calculate the margin size that should be used. Now, that's actually the technique that's used to auto-center elements on the page. Now, that auto-centering on the page is only going to work if an element has a width property defined to it. Now, with all of that in mind, let's go ahead and jump into our project and start adding in some margins. So I'm going to go ahead and jump over here to the main.css, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to jump up here to the top, and I'm going to modify this page rule and set the margin to auto. Now, to really see this in effect, I need to change my max width here to something that I can really see inside of my browser. Whenever I get done with this, I'll change it back to the 1100, but for now I'll just change it to 700. So I'll go ahead and save that and jump over here into my browser, and whenever I refresh, notice how we have left and right hand sides that are going to be equal. So that's how that auto works. So if you want that centered look so that it appears as if it's a piece of paper inside of the browser, you're going to use margin auto with some type of width property set. So I'll go ahead and change my width back to 1100 and save that. Jump back in here and refresh. And it's going to give me the look that I want because of the size of my particular browser. Next, I'm going to go ahead and level the playing field when it comes to our headings and divisions. So I'll set my margin to 0. Go ahead and save that and come back in here and refresh, and notice how everything just kind of tightens up. That's because we have removed the margin for all of our different elements. Of course, it has not removed padding, so if you notice down here in our tutorials, I've got the header here, but there's still space here and up here. That's because we have padding set on the tutorial section. Now, another thing to note with our margin 0 here is that it did not end up getting rid of the margin down here. Now, I know that because we have a more powerful selector right here. So we have an ID selector, and then we end up having the type selector. So no variation of type selectors can end up overriding an ID selector. So our margin auto is going to be fine right here. So let's say that we had the same selector value here as we did right here. The way that we could make sure that the rule that's declared up here wins is by moving this rule below the other so that we'd have the last rule being declared wins. So actually we have two things here that's protecting us. We have this margin auto set after our margin 0, and we're using a more powerful selector. Now with both of those things in place, that concludes this first part of adding margins to our project.